Welcome back to another week of Lunch Money brought to you by Sharesies. So at Sharesies, our purpose is to create the most financially empowered generation.
Yeah, and for those of you who are new to Lunch Money, we do this every Thursday at lunchtime. And this is a place where you as investors can hear from the people leading some of the companies available through the Sharesies platform and other investing experts too.
So Lunch Money is also available as a podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts and Google Podcasts. Please, if you are listening to this as a podcast, if you had a moment to leave a rating or comment on Apple, we'd really, really appreciate it. But by means of introduction, I'm Alice. I'm a financial analyst here at Sharesies. So I support a lot of the news and educational content that we put out to our investors. And join with me today is Brooke, and I'll let her introduce herself.
Kia ora koutou. I'm Brooke, one of the co-founders and co-CEOs of Sharesies, and I'm actually based in Sydney at the moment. So we are in lockdown over here. But because I'm in Sydney and I'm in Gadigal land, I really want to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land which we're operating on, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and I pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. So just a reminder, if you have any questions for us, please do submit them through the Ask a Question button, which is below, and don't leave any questions in the discussion area because we might miss them and we really want to make sure we cover them.
So just as a note, a bit of a legal disclaimer, we don't offer any personalised advice. Investing involves risk. You aren't guaranteed to make money and you might lose the money that you start with. So yeah, we don't provide personalised advice, and any information that we talk about today is general only and current at the time. Please also be kind and respectful towards our speakers and your fellow viewers. Otherwise, we will have to take steps to remove you from the webinar.
Cool, we've got a really exciting guest as always. So today we're joined by Grant Straker. He's the founder and CEO of Straker Translations. Straker Translations is listed on the Australian Stock Exchange, but it's actually based in Aotearoa, New Zealand. So Grant's here today to chat to us about his business and what's been happening in it lately. So no mai haere mai whakatau, my Grant. Welcome to Lunch Money today.
Kia ora koutou. Great to be here.
Welcome, Grant. Perhaps we could just kick things off by letting you introduce yourself and tell us a bit about your background. Who are you and how did you end up founding Straker Translations?
Yep, very good question. I get asked a number of times, and so it's a bit of a crazy story, to be honest. I'm a Kiwi, but I went to the UK as a teenager and joined the British Army and spent a lot of my 20s in the UK in the army, and then I came back to New Zealand and didn't know what I was going to do, so I went and studied engineering, and that took me into computer programming. So I hadn't turned a computer on by the age of 30, really. And then I was working for a gas company, and I'm just going back a little bit in history to get you how this company started. And I found that I had to do a lot of programming logic around gas flows and things. So I wrote an Excel program, I figured out how it worked, and then I found it wouldn't do enough. So I looked under the hood and found that you could actually, there was this thing called programming language where you could program things. And so I just taught myself VB Basic, and then started to just quite enjoy the programming. So then Java had started, I taught myself Java, and then thought maybe I should go on a course because all these people were asking me to write programs. This is in the late 90s. And so I went off and went on a course, and I sort of seemed to know more than the instructor. So that company asked me if I would come and contract for them. So off I went and sort of gave up my job, but at exactly the same time I met my wife-to-be. In a cross-dressing bar in Ponsonby, of all places. So I won't even go into that story, but I'm sure, I wasn't in a dress. Anyway, so we met, and then up till then everybody went. I'd said I was going to give up my job, and this internet thing and computers were going to be big. Everybody thought I was insane, but she actually didn't. Which is probably why I married her. So off we went, and we went off and we just started this company doing computer services, and very early on we got a contract with Tourism New Zealand to build a new version of newzealand.com that could support multiple languages. So we were not a translation company then, we were just building a platform to allow that content to run in many languages. So we were able then to sort of turn that into a product and then sell that around the world. And in the old days, when you didn't have the cloud, it all had to be done on different computer systems inside of buildings, and it was a hard business to scale. So for about 10 years we ran this business. We had a license model, and it was a good, successful sort of lifestyle business, I guess you'd say. But we could see that there was a big opportunity in the translation space, because customers were asking us, why don't you become can you provide this workflow around translation? So we went off and sort of looked at that industry and went, this is a huge industry. It's like, back then it was a 35 billion US industry. We could see that technology was going to really impact it, that AI was going to play a big part, and that the whole industry was made up of people that just didn't want to embrace technology. And we just found that was strange. So, their argument would be that computers are not going to start to play a big part in this industry. And I think it's pretty obvious that they were going to, and AI was definitely going to, machine learning was absolutely going to play a big part. So we went, let's build a system that utilizes this change in technology inside this enormous industry, and let's build a big global company out of New Zealand. And that was the idea. And that's what we've, I guess, gone and done. And along the way, we've grown and we've made different decisions to support that growth. And one of those decisions was to be a listed company, because that's given us the capital framework to really significantly grow. Because and when you're it's now a $54 billion US industry, it's huge. It's enabling all of the commerce, transactions, free flow of entertainment, everything that needs to break down those barriers to allow people that speak different languages and want to and have different cultures and everything else to do that easily. So incredibly, we've been able to do it. And if you'd asked us 22 years ago, when my wife and I were doing this in the front room of my very average flat in the middle of Ponsonby, I think that it's amazing, to be honest. And so, yeah, happy to answer questions for everybody about what happened in between.
That's definitely such a really fascinating journey that you've been on, from coming out of the army, as you say, starting out the business is something quite different to what it is today, not focusing in on translations to start with. Can you tell us a little bit about the AI technology and kind of what solutions the company actually offers its customers?
Yeah, sure. So I think as an investor, when you look at what's going to start to really drive value in companies, it's about how AI improves productivity. It's all about productivity. And if you look at companies that are really trying to drive this, it's around productivity. And so we are fundamentally a productivity play and using machine learning to make humans more productive. So if you think of a human's working can translate at 500 words an hour, and by themselves, I'm just picking a number, it's probably much lower than that actually, if they were just doing it all manually. You can make them go at 1,000 words an hour. You've just halved the time it takes to complete that translation. Now, if that human is earning the same hourly rate, you've just halved your supply cost, right? And so that's how you get operating leverage, which starts to add real value. And that's how I think humans and machines together across all sorts of industries are going to work, right? It's going to be about how productive do you make people? And then if you draw that out a bit further, you go, well, how do you commercialize that? And so one of the things that we did was go that the commercial model for this whole industry was based on content volumes. It was based on the number of pages, the type of words, or the number of website words or whatever it was. And so what we've done is move it into we might charge by content volume. But the way that we work with our suppliers is on time and efficiency. So, and quality, right? So you're saying that what we can do is you produce exactly the same quality as you've done this manually, if not better, but you're going to do it much faster, and we're going to pay you for the time that it takes to deliver that. So it's about figuring out how you get the right commercial framework to benefit from this productivity gain. And so what ends up happening is the customers win. It takes half as long. Maybe the pricing, if you can improve the quality, is also lower for them over the whole content volumes that they're working on, and we win as we make higher margins. And that comes out, and if you look at our numbers, our gross margins are significantly higher than the rest of the industries because of our technology. So that's ultimately what the AI does. But in essence, it's like a Google Translate. It's taking machine content, and it's giving a machine learning pass of that content. Now, that doesn't mean much with the humans until you put it into a platform where they can gain. And so what we've done over the last 10 years is continually iterate around what makes humans go faster. And it's not just about the machine. Some humans go faster than other humans. Some humans go faster based on different kind of content. Some humans go faster when the content's above or below or side by side. There are certain ways to phrase things inside of the way you display that content. So all of these iterations, we're continually doing thousands of experiments a week in real time to figure out how you make how you make humans more productive.
And Grant, one thing you just mentioned, sorry, Brooke, was you mentioned suppliers. What do you mean by that? Like, who are the suppliers, and what are they supplying to you as a company?
So they're translators, so they're human translators. Okay. So everybody now talks about sort of, the model of, I guess, an Uber type model, freelance type model. But, the translation industry's operated on that forever. So it's always been the industry, and it's always been a lifestyle choice for many of these translators to work on, to live on the beach or whatever, and to be able to do this stuff online, certainly for the last 20, 30 years. And so it's, they are the suppliers, they're the humans that provide this. And, we have a fantastic relationship with all of our suppliers. We can give them, really good deal flow. As I said, if they're getting paid a really good hourly rate that they like, they're happy. Sure, if we've got technology that reduces the amount of hours they need to do, that they're also okay, because there's so much content volume that needs translating, and there's plenty of work for all of them.
Yeah, it sounds like there's a lot of focus on like that optimization and that productivity, and then also that lifestyle for the suppliers that you have. Can you tell me a bit about like who are Straker's customers? And you mentioned a little bit about how you make margin. Can you talk a little bit more about like how you make that money, or how do those customers pay for the service?
Sure. So fundamentally, we're a technology company at our heart, because it's the technology that enables us to get a lot of flow of content, right? But in essence, what we're doing for our customers is we are translating all sorts of different types of content. So our largest customer, and the big deal that we announced towards the end of last year, was a global supply agreement with IBM. So IBM went from 20 suppliers around the world down to one. And so they looked at our technology and our approach. They are an AI-driven company who's also changing their supply chain so that they're sort of eating their own dog food, if you like. They're saying, like, we're telling all our customers they should be moved to an AI-driven supply chain. We're also going to do it. So who's got the best technology to enable us as a global company with 10,000 employees to easily communicate with all of our customers and all of our employees and all of our stakeholders all around the world? And so they saw the value in our technology. So they're a big one, a large technology company that we're doing lots of work. And so we're automating lots of systems with them. We're doing all sorts of stuff all around the world. And then we have, large media companies that need to do, streaming and that sort of subtitling type work. We've got large law firms, quite big in manufacturing. So we have a lot of manufacturing companies. So Mitutoyo is a large Japanese manufacturer of measuring devices. So as an engineer, actually, in my previous life, I did a lot of work in with Meditoyo Instruments, and I never knew it till they became a customer, and then you see how prevalent all of their high-tech micrometers and stuff are. But they, for instance, sell all around Europe, and every month they'll do a brochure. And now it used to be a PDF, now it's a sort of website stuff where they'll say we've got 50 products and these are on special, but they'll do that into 20 languages around Europe and another 10 around the world. And so if you look at the volume of content and you multiply it by the number of languages, it's actually, they're a really significant customer. We have some large auto manufacturers who produce cars, and if you think about a car, you've got the driver's manuals, you've got all that sort of stuff, you've got all the marketing stuff that goes on the website, you've got all of the technical manuals that go into their dealerships all around the world. So there's just a huge volume of this content that needs to be translated. Nike are a significant customer of ours on the technology side, where they're using our technology to route all of their translations throughout, from manufacturing through into all their different sales things. We just picked up Panasonic, which again is another sort of manufacturer tech type customer. And then we just have a long tail of all sorts of customers around the world, and it goes from sort of as a company we're in New Zealand, Australia, Japan, Europe and France, sorry, not France, and Spain and Germany, Ireland, and then in the US.
Yeah, we're just talking about it before, how it's difficult at the moment when you can't access all your teams and people across the world, but it's great to hear about a Kiwi business that has got that global reach and that global impact. And I really liked hearing too about the first time I'd heard about that AI supply chain, and obviously as IBM focusing on artificial intelligence and then wanting to make sure that the other companies they integrate with focus on, have that similar approach, I guess makes things a lot faster. And when you're talking about productivity earlier, and when you're talking through your customers, I really started to think about all the places I see multiple languages, and how there's so many more places that would probably benefit from that too. And, that inclusivity that can happen when people can read things in their own language and feel connected to that. Is it all text only, or is there voice aspects of the translations that Straker do?
No, there's text, there's voice, there's media. There's a whole range of solutions that we provide. So more and more what we're finding when you're dealing with a large global company and you win a global supply agreement, for example, they want you to be the one-stop shop. So they want you to help with their interpreting. They want you to help with the media, which is becoming quite big, corporate media. I mean, this is in fact corporate media right now. So what we're doing here is if you wanted to suddenly Sharesies opens in Japan, not suddenly, but I'm sure eventually, right? You'll be global domination, you'll be opening all over the place. Then this might be subtitled, and you might want that, right? And so this corporate type media work is actually really growing quite substantially. So we just did the IBM Think Conference, which used to be an in-person conference. Now it's kind of a blended one because of the COVID restrictions. But that was huge, and we did a massive volume of content, something like about 20 times more than we did last year with IBM Think. And it had to be done in like 5 days. It was a huge quantum of accelerated volume. And our technology handles all that as well, right? So it's connecting in, and it's driving this huge volume of work that traditional technologies can't handle. It is a whole range. One question, I'm not sure if it's on the list, that we always get is, surely Google or Microsoft or someone's going to open space. Surely it's all just going to be machines, right? So, but what you find is you need humans. So no matter what you do, if you study AI and you look at what's going to happen, you always have to have some human context in there. And language is just too complicated to just think that we can do it. In short little segments, yes, you can, but in more general details, you can't. So you're always going to need humans. And so one of the parts of our engines is that as we translate and we get human input, which gives context to all of this, it feeds back into the engine, which becomes this huge data asset that we have which again is a really valuable IP for us as a company.
Yeah, that's a great point there, because when we've just recently started expanding into Australia, and obviously the main languages in Australia and New Zealand are English, but there's those colloquialisms and those differences and that localization that needs to happen in any area. And so I totally see that that human element is always is a key part of making sure that it reads in a way, or you hear it in a way that makes sense to the cultural aspects of language too.
Yep.
I was really interested in you. Oh, sorry, did you have something you wanted to?
No.
Okay.
I was.
Yeah. I'm interested a little bit to dig into the business, and you had $31 million in revenue in your last financial year, the one just been. Congrats on that. And really interested in helping the people listening know a bit more about how you make such a great revenue of like 31 million in revenue, but still operate at a loss. Like not making a profit at the moment. And could you talk a bit through about why that is the case and for Straker Translations?
Sure. Absolutely. So if you look at it, actually our pro forma revenues for last year were 42 million. So because we acquired a company and that had a certain amount of revenue. And as a company, like we're in growth mode, we've got a massive opportunity in front of us. Now, one thing I learned when I talked earlier about those 10 years of running the company in its old version was that my wife and I had to run that company. That company fed our kids, it paid our mortgage, right? So you learn the disciplines of cash flow. You run your whole business on a cash basis. And I've never lost that instinct. Right? It's still very deep in me. I haven't just, and I'm trying to be kind to some of the younger entrepreneurs out there that suddenly just get $50 million and go crazy because, it's all just about spending loads of money and burning it as fast as you can and getting somewhere. Now, we're very different. We do make a loss, but we're always very close to break even. I think if you looked at the second half of last year, we were kind of cash flow break even, right? Or EBITDA break even. And that's roughly where we want to kind of be as we grow, right? We don't want to have massive burning cash going on because we think that the best source of capital are your customers to support your growth. So we want to do that. But there are times when you need to make investments for growth. So we've got a massive opportunity with IBM, for example, right now. We've given forecasts for this financial year of more than 50 million in revenue, right? So to support that, we need to put all the systems in place and make sure we've got all the people around to support that level of growth. And as you do that, it takes investment, and then so you might have another half a year where you're not making EBITDA and you are sort of getting through some cash, but that starts to kick in as the revenues come through later. I mean, if we stopped tomorrow, if we just said, look, let's not invest in growth, let's not try to get to 100 million in revenue, we would be a hugely profitable company. I've got no doubt about that. If you look at our P&L and our base, we would be there. But we want to, what we want to do now is we're at that inflection point where we've said to the market, and I've said this many times, we want to be a 100 million revenue company. And if you look at the forward-looking sort of discounted cash flows that the analysts are doing, they'll do one up to 100 million, and you can say, right, as a $100 million company, we might be a double-digit EBITDA company, and that then can underpin how you see a valuation, and you can decide whether we're undervalued right now or overvalued, right? But or with the right value. But I think it shows that there's a lot of leverage to come through now that we've reached this point. So now that we've got a solid, we've got kind of everything we need in place. We've got this big organic growth driver through the likes of an IBM. If we win a couple more of those global type deals, there's a lot of cash and profit that starts to come off that. So that's really the rationale. It's a logical decision. As I say, we always sit there or thereabouts. If we decided to pull a few levers and we wanted to make some profit, and I think I said this at our full year, if investors want us to make $2 million this year, I can go and do it. not a problem at all. If you want to, see some EBITDA and some but I think right now they would much rather they see us move far closer to that 100 million mark, and position ourselves for it. And then in FY23, FY24, you should start to see that come through. So that's the underlying rationale. We can grow. We have a variable cost base, as I say, in terms of suppliers. They're not full-time employees; they're freelance, which means that things like COVID hit or things happen, you can scale up and scale down as you need to your cost base. And we have global teams in place already, and they can start to now handle more throughput in terms of volume without having to add to the costs.
That's really interesting and good points you raise around, the focus on growth at the moment and how that might not at the moment lead to profit, but and it's that balancing act of the cash flows. What I'm quite interested in asking you about is, with those growth opportunities, you mentioned that there's a level of investment required, and no doubt that's also in your people and the resources that go into the company. Being based out of New Zealand, are there any challenges about being in New Zealand but operating on the world stage and competing against global companies?
Well, there are lots of challenges, I think. Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt that if we wanted to grow let's just have a global company without sort of being related into one particular country or whatever. You could do that if we were better placed and had people in Europe or in the US, as our HQ. But that doesn't really drive back value into New Zealand. And I guess just as a New Zealander living here and born here and kids growing up here and everything else, I think that it's important that we build large technology companies out of New Zealand. So there are some barriers to overcome, but there's also some benefits in the way that you think. So as you're growing, one of the benefits that we found was that we had to think differently. We couldn't be based down here and start to win business if we didn't have an alternative offering that the market didn't have. Hence, we looked at the sort of per hour productivity-based way of growing the business, whereas everybody in Europe might have been quite complacent and just sat there and said, this is the way it's always been, this is what we're going to keep doing, and focus on how they grew on their existing business model. We knew we had to be different to win globally, and so that works. Obviously, not being able to travel has been a bit of a hindrance, I think, in the last 18 months, and I could certainly do with being able to travel to engage with the teams again. But that being said, when we could travel, we spent all that time setting up to make teams remote. And I have a philosophy. What you find is as a business grows, that adds more complexity, and that complexity sort of stops your growth. It's just a well-known fact, right? Unless you figure out how you're going to not have those issues. And so I always have it behind me now, one team, one platform. Everybody works on one team. We've got our technology. Everybody's working on that same platform, and we all act as one team. That way, everybody knows what everybody else is doing, and we can follow the sun. You can start a job in New Zealand, it can get finished in Europe. And then we also operate what we call business units, so that people in market operate their own business. So we have a business owner, Amaya in Spain, for example. She's looking after that Southern European market. She has a P&L, she has targets, she has a team that work for her, and her job is to go out and look at that and give a contribution back to the group. So we talk about profit. Her job is to deliver a profit. She's got to deliver a profit back to the group. If we as a group decide to spend that profit in R&D and research, and other things to drive future value, that's what we'll do. So we have this model, and that's enabled us to grow globally by having this setup. And there's a good book, actually. It's called Cokeland, of all things. And it's about Coke industry. It's not about Coca-Cola or White Line Fever. It's very much about how this guy ended up being the world's fourth richest person, right? So he did a lot of things right. I'm not saying I support any of his political philosophies or anything else, but what they did was exactly that they made sure that everybody, as they grew, with their own that business like they were a founder of that business, and that they had that mindset. And so that enabled them to scale. So previous to COVID, we had done enough and we were global enough to make, I think it's quite difficult now for a New Zealand company to go out and set up like that without being able to travel, but we had done enough to get there. Yeah, and there's always, it is a lot of time. It was a lot of time away from it. It's been quite nice to be back and have 18 months, in New Zealand without that travel. My kids got back into playing rugby, which they could never do because we'd go off in the middle of winter to Europe. It's all those sorts of things that actually have been really nice, more from a family viewpoint. So that's the sacrifice I think that you make as you go global. You just end up always on the road. If it was, especially when I work with my wife, one of us would be on the road and away from the other one, which is probably why we're still married after 22 years. It's probably so as soon as we can open back up, that'll be fantastic. So
yeah, I totally relate to what you're saying. I mean, Leighton and I, we're husband and wife working in business too, and moved our kids over here to Sydney to capture some of the help with some of those growth complexities you're talking about. And I'm definitely going to read that book, so thanks for that tip there. I really appreciate that. One other thing I'm really keen to touch on, I definitely want to make sure we get to ask questions from the audience, is you've recently raised around, I think it was about 20 million in Australian. What do you plan to do with that capital? Where's the 5-year vision for Straker Translations going?
Yeah, sure. Look, so we don't give a timeline to it, but we try and indicate. So when we listed in 2018, we said, look, we think we can take the funds from the IPO and we can become a 50 million revenue company, without giving it too much of a timeline, because it's like guidance, and everybody and most boards on public companies hate that. But what we've done is actually we've achieved that. So we've given guidance of 50 million this year, and we've used the proceeds from our IPO to get there. Right. Next mission for us is to say that we want to get to 100 million. That's what we want to do. We want to get 100 million revenue. And so one of the ways that we've got revenue is through acquiring companies and then acquiring relationships with larger customers and then being able to grow them global. So IBM's an example. We bought a small company in Barcelona. They had IBM as a customer for Spanish. We were able to grow that relationship and then win the whole of IBM and really substantially grow that business. And to give you an idea of the quantum on that deal, in Spanish, they were a 7-figure customer for us, just in Spanish, right? And we've been given 55 languages, right? Now, that doesn't mean that each one is that size by any means, right? But there's a good 10 or 12 that are that size. So just to give you an idea of, right? So you can see how quickly you can grow. Now, we still feel that there's a lot of relationships in those large companies still locked up in these smaller sort of language service providers. So there is an opportunity still to grow with some acquisition, and we also feel now it's easier for us to win these large IBM type deals because we've got IBM as a case study. So it's easier to go in and say that IBM spent a year doing due diligence on our technology and implementing it. So it works. So we've got organic and inorganic growth opportunities. Post-COVID, we think that the inorganic opportunities, so the acquisition opportunities, will increase because, and I'm seeing it already with the deal flow, potential deal flow coming through. And if you look at our full year, we've already said to people that we are looking in quite advanced stages of discussions with a number of potential M&A opportunities. So the vision is to get to that, and the reason it's important is it's not just a number that you pick. Scale is important, and what we saw with IBM was that was the first time in this industry where a really major consumer of translation, a buyer of translation services, has picked innovation and technology over scale. So traditionally, they would have gone to one of the really large translation service providers, probably doing, $500 million in revenue, that 300, 400, 500 million type size company. but they didn't. They went for the one that had the innovation that's going to help solve their problems. And that's pushed us up in scale. So now we're going to be, you get to 100 million, you've got innovation and scale together, right? And that puts us in a fantastic place. So it's not just a number for the sake of a number. It's a number that, one, starts to drive really strong profits off of the model that we've got, and two, starts to get us into the stage where people, these large organizations, know that we've both got the scale and the innovation. So that's really the vision. The vision is to now start to use all the operating leverage we've got to start to really deliver back for shareholders.
You're mentioning that in a scale being quite important and mergers and acquisition opportunities starting to, become more and more opportunities coming at you. And you recently acquired Lingotech, I believe. What's it like acquiring a company? What is, what was that like for you? I know that you talked about the big due diligence IBM did with you over a year to get a contract, but this is about like creating, acquiring a business, getting them embedded in, or if that is what you do, like, what does it feel like? How do you go about it? And what are you looking for? Are you looking for innovation or scale or both when acquiring?
Yeah, sure. Look, so it's always worth remembering that, I'm making all this up as I go along in terms of, the business journey, right? I went from being a soldier with no business experience to teaching myself to program and this is another kind of thing that you've got to do. I mean, the same as listing a company, you've got to learn, right, how do you acquire a company and what do you do? And so the main thing is to have really good advisors around you. So I work with one of our directors, Steve Donovan, who has done a lot of M&A. And so I've been able to learn off him as we've gone around exactly. So that's for the deal part of it. So it's got a, and again, it's just basic business basics. You've got somebody who's founded a company and built that company up and they want to sell it, and they've got staff that work for them. So that, one of the important things that we would always do is travel there and meet them and go out for dinner and, have a few drinks or whatever and sort of just get to know each other, right? And go, okay. Now, in every acquisition, because we're public as well, we say, look, we need to get some consolidation gains out of this business because that's how we're going to make it more profitable, but not hugely, right? We keep most of the staff and we need to consolidate some functions because we've got people that do that already. We're going to get margin increases because most of them have margins of about 40%. We can make 55%, for example, 60%. So we can make them more profitable by putting them on our platform. And so initially we do that. We've gotten better and better at this as we've gone along with each acquisition. You acquire them, you've got to bring the people into the culture. Most of them, you get two types. On the whole, they're generally great. This is a great change opportunity. It's really exciting. It's going to be great to be part of a bigger group, where you get people that just don't want to change and have been that way forever and they hate change. And, that's not a bus. And this isn't the bus it's for them, right? They should be on a different bus. So, yeah, you do that. You go through the process. You learn how to sort of negotiate as part of the deal and all the caveats that you need to fill in to make sure that everything goes the right way. And for us, it's like a portfolio of companies, and we've acquired 8. So if you think about it, you get a lot of funds that might have 10 or 12 investments in there. So the more that you have, the more that you know that some are really going to accelerate way beyond what your expectations are. So you can win an IBM and you take it from a few million revenue to potentially, significantly larger because of that one deal. You get some, so you get a couple that'll perform really well, a couple that'll just deliver kind of what you wanted, a couple that'll underperform over time, or so that's just what happens. But there's it's an interesting process. And Lingotech was the biggest. It was a US-based one. It was all done in COVID, so we didn't get to meet everybody the same way. It's a first one that's had some technology, which is synergistic to ours. So all of our technology is about enabling the flow of content, translation content, right? So it's about doing that. They have a SaaS model, so they have about 5 million in SaaS revenue, which is a bit more than 5 million US in SaaS revenue, and that's quite important. So now we've got this, and we got them again. We'll talk about why do you raise money. We got them at exactly the right time where we had the ability to do a fast deal, and they kind of needed a fast deal because COVID had affected them in terms of they were for sale before COVID. They had a fund that needed to sort of exit that, them as a portfolio because the time was up. And it was just a perfect timing for us to get a fantastic acquisition away. And they've delivered incredibly well since we've done that. And probably the market hasn't really understood the SaaS component and valued us, I don't believe. Maybe hasn't understood it and given, when you look at some of the other SaaS companies, they're getting valued on crazy multiples. Then maybe the market hasn't fully understood the value of some of the underlying revenue. They did start to, I think, just recently. So so it's really it's another part of a business growth journey, right? We've done it 8 times. You learn. It's a really interesting thing because these people who have grown these businesses and you're buying them and taking them to the next level, and you're looking after their staff and you're trying to work through it, and you need to come across and they need to understand that you're not actually, we're not a private equity company that's going in there just to kind of wipe them out and do this. We care about our staff, we care about the staff we take on, and we're trying to grow together.
That's really interesting. And you raise a really good point there around it's not just all the hard work that goes into getting a deal across the line. It actually is all of the work that has to go in behind the scenes after the deal, has been crossed over, and aligning everyone's interests and bringing everyone on board and, welcoming them into the Straker whānau. And, with 8 acquisitions, I'm sure, you start to learn how that process goes. I thought we could jump over to some questions that people listening have asked. And actually one of them on here is something I was hoping to ask you. And I mean, you mentioned before about some of these acquisitions, they're private equity owners not private equity owners, owners of the business who want to get out. For you, your story's been a bit different. You decided to list the company, but why did you choose to list on the ASX instead of the NZX?
Sure. Look, so really simple. Like, just as a New Zealand company, we've got very little support from New Zealand investment community when we were trying to grow. And so we went around and I said, okay, we want to list. Let's go and talk to some funds here. And we just got next to nothing. Talk to the brokers. There was just hardly any interest from anybody, right? And so I just found that frustrating. And so when we went and talked to Australian investors and institutions, they were far more interested in the story. They could see the value, and we have delivered value for them since IPO, right, quite significantly. And then it just came back down to, this was in the pre-IPO stage, and then it came down to, we can invest in you in pre-IPO, but only if you're in a list on the ASX. So that was the end of that conversation. And had we got some New Zealand funds that had been more interested, and then maybe you would have got there. But even when we listed, we just got no retail support at all from New Zealand sort of retail brokers. So I think it's that was it. And once you said you can have funds and it's ASX or not. And so the one thing that we did do at the time was I said, look, there's no. Some of them wanted us to actually be headquartered in Australia, and I don't know if anybody else does this, but they wanted you to hold all your IP and have all of your your company. Your company could be headquartered down physically in New Zealand, but they wanted all the IP to be held in Sydney, right? So that you didn't have to, if you pay dividends, it could be the tax was easier for Australian investors. Now I went back and said I don't believe that that's the case, and we had a review done with international tax. Experts said it's actually tax neutral, so there's no downside for either country because of the tax treaties. At which point I was then more comfortable to go, okay, let's list on the ASX because there is no downside, and we could keep all our IP here. So again, in the days come when we start to pay significant profits and you're paying tax on those profits, it's going to New Zealand and not to Australia, because I think my phrasing at the time was I didn't spend the last 20 years building a company in New Zealand to pay tax in Australia.
it's interesting, all those complexities behind listing and where to list, and then but I know 02, they moved over to the Australian Stock Exchange because of the depth of the market that they needed there, and I guess more of that institutional support they were looking for. I got one more question and then we can wrap up, and the question I've got here from Lawrence is, how would your service compare to a free translation like Google Translate for something like a 30-page software manual in terms of correctness, grammar, etc.? Maybe looking for and
I think it depends on the language and the type of content, right? So look, again, our engine, depending on what you're doing, is going to take that in, it's going to format it, it's going to speed up the whole process. It's going to keep all the formatting. It's going to have in-context reviews, and then depending on what it is, I should think it would be substantially superior than just a pure machine translation. Depending on how much content changes, depends on the content. So.
Yeah, very cool. Hey, thank you so much for joining us, Grant, and thanks heaps, Alice, for helping out on it with Lunch Money again. Really appreciated having you here, Grant. It was fantastic to get a bit more insights into Straker Translations and where you're heading and where you've come from. So, yeah, kia ora and thanks for that. So next Thursday, we'll be joined by David Darling from Pacific Edge. Pacific Edge is a cancer diagnostic company and they've just released their annual report for 2021. So we'll discuss that with David, as well as what the company has planned. So you can register your interest for that through the link in the chat. Enjoy the rest of your week. Enjoy your weekends. I believe Matariki starts tomorrow. So the Māori New Year. So have a wonderful next few weeks.